My name is Thomas Phifer of Thomas Phifer and Partners. We began our practice in 1997, and we have about 25 architects that have, most of them have been here for a pretty long time. And we do a wide range of projects. We do very, very small houses and light fixtures and furniture. And we're just about to start construction on our largest project, the United States Courthouse in Salt Lake City, worth about $180 million, and all in between. Architecture, I think, is trying to define the times that we live. It's trying to kind of make a place for the culture and the times that we live. It's kind of a reflection. And I think for too long, a lot of buildings have been closed, they've been fortresses. And I think in our generation, with our values, we really seek to try to open buildings up again, open buildings to nature, to the movement of the sun, to the sound of the wind, to remembering a thunderstorm, to kind of bringing back that sense of nature as a part of architecture. I think that's important. I mean, the way that culture is reflected here in the buildings that we build, the times that we build, a little bit like art, and what kind of art is made now as a reflection of the times. I think our responsibility is to kind of push the human consciousness forward, to kind of say that we live in a moment that's really transitional. We live in a moment that, with so many people here, with so many resources that need to be saved, that we need to take a leadership role in trying to transform society with buildings, with places that people occupy and their reflection of the times that we live. I think that's another responsibility that architects have, is to push technology forward. We live in such a remarkable time right now. I mean, when I began my architectural training, we were still drawing. We were still kind of making drawings by hand. And the way buildings are made now, the kind of technological advances that have happened are so extraordinary that I think we need to take advantage of that. And every day we do a lot of research with materials, with what materials, how these new materials can get formed and placed on the appropriate surfaces. And it is kind of an ever-changing landscape for research, because the world is opened up with the internet. The world is opened up with research. The world has become a new place. It's really one world now, where it used to be much more compartmentalized. I think things that are going on, in the Middle East, things that are going on in Japan, things that are going on in Europe, are things that are going on here as well, because we're all connected again. And I think that is probably the most extraordinary thing about the times that we live, and a reflection of our society as being an open place, and trying to reflect that with new materials, trying to reflect that in the architecture, trying to reflect those moments where people can come together, I think is really an important thing. And we have a responsibility to preserve natural resources, to preserve, to let buildings land lightly on the landscape, to make them be reversible, to be recyclable, to deal with water, to deal with all of those natural resources need to get harnessed. But I think what's behind all of this is much more, yes, we need to preserve natural resources and protect the environment, But I think even more important than that, we have to bring people closer to nature. And I think that is probably the overriding principle of what we're involved with here, trying to make that extraordinary connection. What I like to do most is to come to the office and work. I happen to be a very shy person, and so I don't network very much. We don't really publish that widely. Your website has been extraordinary that way. So I think that's a very hard question for me to answer, because I'm not as concerned about that. I am concerned about sharing, though, and I think the sharing of ideas and the translation of the sharing of ideas is extremely important to us, but we don't tend to be out in the mainstream, because I think we tend to be much quieter here. We tend to want to have a quiet voice. We tend to want to have a focus here rather than a broad focus. So I think if that's what you mean by networking, I really tend to be very quiet here, I think. I think that is the thing that connects us to the outside world, that connects us as we try to be a little bit quieter here, a little bit more insulated. That is our connection to the world, and we rely on it as the door that is just kind of an extraordinary place to go every day. It's really amazing growing up during the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, when the fax machine was being invented, when the computer was becoming a part of your life here. I can just see our work and see the work kind of evolving in a way that begins to understand culture a little bit better. I think the internet and the way that you can reach out to other cultures, hear what they're saying, hear what their understandings are, not only in the artistic community, but in business, in research, in art, in all of these other disciplines that are so important to our practice. All these little tentacles that go out. The internet is really the connection. I mean, one of the reasons we live in New York is because we can kind of tap into the culture here and tap into the culture of New York, which is really important. But the internet is really our door to the world. And it's our door to not just architecture, but many, many other disciplines that are so important to kind of making the architecture of our time. Because, in essence, these buildings that we make don't really look backwards. They want to look forwards. They want to look to a new time. They want to lead. They want to kind of translate themselves and search for that inherent kind of meaning and have a conscience. That's a really good question. I think the thing to do that was really important to me is to travel and to see new things. I grew up in South Carolina and had never been out of the South until I was 21 years old. Never really been on an airplane. And I went to Europe when I was 21 and spent some time there. And it completely opened my world up. And I became a new person then. Because back then, you had to look at National Geographic, you had to look in books, you had to go to the library, you had to kind of search out printed media then to even begin to understand what it was like in other places. And now the world is so open to travel, the world is so open to people moving about freely, that I think it's important when you're beginning to search about whether you want to be an architect, whether you want to be in the arts, to travel and to learn and to look and see what is there. Kind of discover. I think to become an architect, you've got to have an inherent curiosity. Curiosity about what's around the corner, curiosity about that culture you haven't met, about why that building is the way it is, about why that tree is sitting there, about why that tree blooms in a particular season. You have to have that sense of curiosity about the way the light moves. And then I think maybe you're ready to begin to search and begin to become an architect. You know, I started my practice after I was at the American Academy in Rome for a little less than a year. And I think you've got to start with an idea. You've got to have a sense of curiosity. And I think you've got to believe that you have a voice, that you have something to say and you have something to contribute. And you have something that you want to search for. It's that inherent kind of sense of curiosity. And I think you begin to then, as the first project develops, as the second project develops, you slowly begin to understand the direction. You slowly begin to kind of understand how you want to translate what you believe into a work of architecture. And I think the older you get, the more mature you get, and the harder architecture becomes. You know, you can see why architects who are much older are finally beginning to understand what kind of buildings to make, because it takes an awfully long time, I think, to really understand the culture and the times that we build in today. It takes an awfully long time to kind of find your voice there. So you just keep having a sense of curiosity. You keep searching, and you continue to make work. And by making work and having a sense of curiosity, you can begin to push the practice along through research, through the extraordinary staff we have, through people, and through clients, through the people you meet that want to build with you. You want them to join along in this search for this place for people here, and this search for a cultural expression.